The strictest limits are self-imposed. FRIEDRE GINAZ Philosophy of the Swordmaster. Welcome friends to another Dune video. Duncan Idaho, Slayer of 16 Sardaukar, Swordmaster of House Atreides, trained at the Ginaz Sword School. What was this training? How did it prepare him? The training takes place over 8 years, keep that in mind. Let's find out. Spoilers for House Harkonnen throughout. Let's get into it. When Duncan arrives, he has romantic notions of what it will take to be a swordmaster. The school is a series of habitable islands where each carries its own master who teaches different techniques. The academy has taught the leaders of many great houses in the Landsraad, and a central skyscraper holds the tomb of its founder, Jul Noret, who died during the Butlerian Jihad. It's his pupils, for your information, that actually founded the school in his honour. The first island was covered in dense jungle, and Jalmareed was Duncan's first instructor. Duncan was put to work digging channels and wells to make the island's water system better. Duncan's skin was covered with bites from the insects, and he figured this was all part of the training to end up being a swordmaster. He became friends with another student, High Ressa. As these work assignments continued, Duncan became resentful, and then an ornithopter arrives, and Duncan finds out he's been working with an actual prison crew. His master says he didn't get into trouble, and he has lost some of his weakness. Duncan says he lived through worse on Gidi Prime. Duncan lived there as a boy and was hunted by Harkonnens for sport. The next island was what remained of a volcano. Duncan was with 110 other candidates and was eager to start. Jay Wu was the junior training master who makes Duncan and the others take a pledge to the swordmasters of the past. Duncan is then made to defend himself, fighting in medieval plate armour with a heavy sword. The other students strike him and he hits no one until he collapses. Jay-Wu asked why he failed. He responds, "Perfect defences are not always an advantage, and the largest weapon is not always the deadliest." The master says Idaho might have learned something. The next island was a barren tooth of rock thrusting up from the sea around it. Their teacher was called Maud Kur. Duncan learned the rules of the Great Convention and its code for armed conflict, and as part of further training was put on a mount with a lance. From his mount's back, Duncan avoided 2 pike thrusts aimed for him and knocked his target off his own mount. Duncan then flattened himself to avoid a thrust from Ressa, his friend. And then, seeing his friend celebrating for a moment, Duncan slammed his lance into the man's side, unseating him and making him the winner. The trainer spoke. "Body and mind are one," Kor said, his voice as sharp as his blade. "What is one without the other? The mind controls the body controls the mind." The students then had to race. The winner would get better barracks on the next island. Duncan picked his way carefully over the terrain, pulled himself up a fissure, searching for hand and footholds. He climbed a dangerous scree slope and ran for the ornithopter he then saw. His friend was close behind, and the bully Kronos as well. Duncan called to his friend to join him, and he and the bully raced to reach Duncan first. His friend made it, and they flew to the next island. Duncan had learned to fly an ornithopter with the Atreides. Ressa said he thought it was a solo test, that only one person could get into the thopter, and Duncan said he learned to help others from the Atreides. Swordmaster Rivi Denari tells them they will learn Bushido, but also he says, if your enemy does not fight to a code, then neither should you. Duncan learns here to slow his body's metabolism and find a sense of peace, to soften his mind like clay in stressful situations so his training can come to the fore. Shortly after, another master arrives and tells them that there has been conflict between House Akazi and House Grunman, and in the class are people from both houses. They are told to renounce their house or be ejected from the academy, as their houses have broken their word of honour. Ressa, Duncan's friend, stays. Many others go. Duncan thinks in that situation he would have chosen the Atreides. Soon after, the trainees would use what they had learned and live or die based on that. Only 51 of Duncan's class remained, and this would be their final physical test. The teachers say you can die on this course because that test is needed, as the family you fight for will expect nothing less. Expect the unexpected, an instructor had told him. Duncan knew the mechs would not be able to think like him due to the edicts of the Butlerian Jihad. The metal butt of his lance hit one, and then he did the same to the other and avoided the knives that stabbed at him. He continued on, watching the floor for pressure pads. He attacked further mechs as they came at him, with knives thrown in the eyes or powerful kicks, and 4 he saw were projections, as they had subtle differences in the light that gave them form. This was advice from Thufir Hawat that was very relevant to him. Then, at last, passing the mechs, he dove into a pool warmed by volcanic springs. He swam until he reached lava tubes, his lungs straining as he emerged into another spring. Mechs attacked him. Duncan fought before realising he had to get through them and not kill everything he saw. He had to get further along on the course, and so he escaped them and fled into the jungle highlands. Before him was a deep chasm and a narrow bridge. Halfway across, beasts appeared, projections to distract him. He kept his balance by controlling his fear. They are not real. He used his spear to knock aside the solid projections and reached the end of the bridge. Then Duncan passed through a gorge and along a path covered in planks. He rolled to avoid gunfire. He vaulted over a thrown spear, and as he landed, something came towards his face. With great speed, he put the lance in their path. A pair of small flying mechs embedded into it. Now Duncan faced the final obstacle, and he had just passed a body of a failed student, a reminder of the stakes he faced. A sunken cauldron filled with burning oil blocked his path, and shields blocked his exit from the path at either side. The smoke was thick in the air. The voice of Paulus, Leto's father, told him to trust his instincts. Listening to that voice, Duncan assessed if the cauldron was real. Throwing his lance, it made a noise. He heard behind him the gate coming forward. It would push him in if he didn't act. He couldn't see the far side to know if there was a path there, but the shield blocking his path might be an option. The slow blade penetrates the shield. And so Duncan, in desperation, pushed his sword through the shield, then cut it up and followed the sword point through, and he was free of the cauldron's smoke. The Swordmasters joined him, happy he survived. Only 43 had. Duncan celebrated with his friend Ressa. Duncan asked him to join the Atreides. Ressa says he has to face his house, Mauritania, and then he will join Duncan. Soon after, they are ambushed by people carrying weapons. A blade cuts into Duncan's shoulder. He lashes out with fists and feet. He cracks bones and rips a throat open. But his moves were answered with stun sticks, and he and his friend were forced into darkness. He woke up, bound in a sea skimmer. Ressa was there too. And it was then Duncan saw the men who had them were the expelled students from earlier, and they gloated at getting these swordmasters captured. Trin Kronos was amongst them. One of the other captured students is made to fight the expelled students for sport, and he is killed, and that triggers the other captured students. Duncan, clutching a crossbow bolt, fights a sword-swinging Mauritania and drives the bolt up under the enemy's chin, then spins with the body so it blocks 3 shots at him. Ressa fought with Duncan, and soon they were the only ones left, and before they could be shot, they dived into the water. They travelled back and joined a meeting of the Swordmasters, who were discussing what to do, and they are inducted then and there as Swordmasters without passing the formal exams. Shortly after, they hear armoured ships approach. Once again, it's the expelled students. Ginaz was politically neutral and had never been attacked. Duncan sees the Masters have been blindly following their beliefs in the rules, and then buildings begin to explode. The Masters go to the tomb of Jewel Noret, fearing they will strike there to get at their heart. The Masters, along with Duncan, are moving the remains to a thopter when they are attacked. A Grunman woman targets Duncan. He grabs her hair and snaps her neck on his knee. A spear lunges at him, and holding on to his anger, Duncan avoids it and slams fingers into the man's ribcage and pierces his heart. And challenged, he watches his friend Ressa fight the bully Kronos. This contest ends when Kronos reveals a gun. Ressa faces him with a sword, and Kronos mentions him still following the rules. Duncan says he doesn't, and thrusts his sword into the chest of Kronos, and soon after the fighting was over, and Duncan vowed to never forget the arrogance of the Swordmasters. Ressa was still set to return to Grunman, and after 8 years, Duncan, with a sword sworn to House Atreides, would return home to Caladan. Now I turn this over to you. What do you think to Duncan's training? Do the Swordmasters need to learn the lessons Duncan sees? Comment down below.